All right, how many people here? This is a pretty full crowd. How many people here is this your first time at the Bitcoin Commons? That's more than usual. How many of y'all are here for consensus? Is that the thing going on? All right, a few of you. Okay.
What about Bitcoin Plus Plus?
Bitcoin Plus Plus also going on this week? Yeah. Well, for the many of you that don't know, the Bitcoin Commons, it's a co-working space. It is a event center. It's really a place for Bitcoiners to come together in person, get things done, meet each other, learn with all of our educational events. We host the world-famous, longest tenured Bitcoin Bit Devs in the world. The Austin Bit Devs is based here every month on Thursday, third Thursday of every month. Also hosts the Austin Bitcoin Club, Lit Devs, and the Austin Bitcoin Design Club. Yes. All of those are monthly or semi-monthly events. We also have co-working desks in here. We moved them all out for the seating today. If you're interested in that, come talk to me or Parker later. But most of all, it's just about getting together and seeing each other in person and learning, like tonight. Tonight we have, this is the first ever Nakamoto Forum debate series, what we hope becomes a series. We're going to be talking about Bitcoin mining. It's particularly important because we like to think that Austin's the sort of Bitcoin capital of the world, but Texas is the energy capital of the world. And on the Bitcoin side, as we all know, the most important thing in Bitcoin is that we have a 21 million supply limit cap, and mining helps enforce that cap. And mining takes energy to perform. They're right up the street at the Capitol. There are a lot of bills right now that are kind of antagonistic towards the mining community in Texas. We'd like to educate the people here and educate our senators and House members and lieutenant governors and governors in the state of Texas to make more thoughtful legislation towards Bitcoin and really to learn about it before they legislate. So events like this, events like Bit Devs and the Austin Bitcoin Club are to further that end, as well as everyone who's participating here. We are going to be recording today, so there will be an artifact at the end of this for people to look at later. And I think that's all of the announcements. So I'm going to introduce my good friend, Tuur Demeester. He's the founder of, excuse me? Oh, yeah, quick. Well, you can't see it right now, but the other thing about the Bitcoin Commons is we have wonderful sponsors. This place, the event tonight is free. We wouldn't be able to do it without our sponsors. We have Unchained right down the hall here. We have NYDIG, 1031, Trammell Venture Partners, Priority Power, TFTC, the podcast right here. If you watch Marty Bent ever, that's his podcast studio right there. And Bitcoin Magazine. Did I leave anyone out? Oh, Fold. Yeah, sorry, this is blocking some. Upstream Data, buying the food tonight.
That's what I was trying to get at.
Oh, okay, yeah.
Yeah, we're not officially a sponsor yet. We'll work on that, but we supply the food, so
yes.
Just wanted to throw that in
Thank you, Upstream. Yeah.
Yeah, if you haven't voted yet, keep that in mind.
All right, folks, I want to introduce my good friend Tuur Demeester. He's the co-founder of Adamant and also a sort of fairly well-known Bitcoin investor and researcher, and also the greatest export that Belgium's ever had, especially to Texas. So Tuur's going to walk you through how the debate's going to work, the participation that we need from y'all. And so Tuur, why don't you take it away?
Thank you. Actually, the greatest export that Belgium ever had to Texas, which I learned about recently, was there was steel that was ordered to build the Capitol. If you look at the top of the Capitol, the dome, the rings that hold it together is Belgian steel. So I would argue that's the greatest export. So yeah, tonight we're going to be debating, and I'm really excited about this particular debate and of course the speakers that we have. But I think it happens often in crypto circles that some of these debating topics feel a bit bland for people that have been in Bitcoin for a long time. Like, should we raise the supply cap, or should we switch to proof of stake or stuff like that? So I'm excited that we have a topic that even the most ardent Bitcoiners are going to have serious disagreements over, and so the way it's going to go is we're going to poll the audience first. and you'll be able to do that with your phones. And then after the whole debate is over, we'll poll you again, and whoever of the two debaters sways the most votes is going to be declared the winner. That's how we're going to do it. So the resolutions that we are going to debate tonight is hydrocarbons are the most sustainable source of energy to mine Bitcoin. And hydrocarbons is oil, natural gas, and coal. So I suggest we just go right in. Let's keep it as unbiased as possible. Forget about the wonderful food you had. And we're just going to vote, just your personal opinion right now, and then we'll poll you again after. So please take out your phones. You'll see a little QR code. They're also along the screens there. Just scan that code. It'll take you to a website. And let me also actually do it.
Everybody vote. We need everybody's participation so that we can have a good baseline. So make sure you vote.
If you can't go to the QR code, just go to slido.com.
Yeah, so I'm going to scan it myself. So, all right. So yeah, it'll take you to three options. Either you're for the motion, against the motion, or you're undecided. All right. Let's give you a minute. All right. Everybody who wanted to has been able to vote. All right. Well, let's move on to the introductions. So I'm really excited about our debaters tonight. The person who's going to argue in favor of the resolution here on my right is Steve Barbour. He came all the way from Alberta, Canada, to be here tonight. Steve is still an oil and gas engineer, project manager, worked in the Canadian energy sector for a long time. And then back in 2016, that early, he started looking into Bitcoin mining, and early 2017 started a company called Upstream Data, where they design, construct, and operate modular Bitcoin mining rigs for upstream oil and gas operations. And to my left, we have Jesse Peltan, who's going to be taking the position against our resolution. Jesse, from a young age, was fascinated by energy, went into uni, pursued a quadruple master's, and then dropped out to co-found this exciting project, which was the very first site for industrial mining in West Texas. He became co-founder of HODL Ranch. And he's also known as the creator of the SPA 256 Bitcoin-powered hot tub, which is not as of yet commercialized. So very exciting. The way this debate is going to be structured is first we'll have 10 minutes where each speaker gets to present their thesis. Then we'll have about 25 minutes debate, maybe a little bit more, and then some closing statements where they just get to summarize, basically do their final sales pitch for you guys. Then we're going to have another vote. Oh no, so there's going to be a Q&A from the audience, and then we'll do another vote, and then we'll know the winner. So with that being said, let us start with Steve. You are in favor of the resolution, hydrocarbons are the most sustainable source of energy to mine Bitcoin. So take it away.
Well, first of all, thanks for inviting me. I'm quite excited for this. I've done a lot of panels over the years, and this format of an actual, a little bit of a more, maybe a contentious debate is actually exciting. So thanks for putting this off. The first thing I just want to address, those of you that know me, a lot of you do, know me personally, some old friends here. Also, a lot of you know me online. Very clearly, I'm going to be on the hydrocarbon is the most sustainable side of Bitcoin mining of this discussion, because I've been very outspoken in favor of it online for many years. I do want to address that, for people that don't know me that well, obviously I run a business based on generating revenue in the hydrocarbon industry. I'm an oil and gas engineer, Upstream Data build systems for doing this, but I'm going to try to keep it unbiased. I mean, just bear in mind, I built my business that way because that was already my mentality. It wasn't that I just fell into this. I've always believed that. So I just thought it might be important to address that. I'm excited that Jesse is my opponent. Me and this guy have been arguing on Twitter. You can look our names up for years, like 2018. You know, I started getting on Twitter, talking about my company in 2017-ish. And I'm one of those jerks, like just smacking, talking solar panels and all that kind of stuff. And he was one of the earliest guys actually giving good discussion with me in the threads, and spent a lot of hours doing research from arguments that provoked by him and others. So I'm excited to do this. So knowing that I'm a pro hydrocarbon guy, I do want to also address that I do respect alternate forms of power generation. I mean, for example, I respect solar panels. They're great on calculators. You know, you don't need a battery. You can calculate things in grade school. You can put them on oil and gas wells to help them communicate in remote locations. I have so much respect for solar. It's great for growing plants. It does all kinds of great stuff like that, but for industrial power generation, it is garbage. It's hot garbage, and I'm very much against the proliferation of that for some reasons I'll get into. I'm also a wind respecter. I respect wind. Wind is excellent for powering sailboats, 18th century technology that no longer matters now that we got diesel and bunker fuel. But I respect it. If you're a bird without wind, you have to do so much work. I mean, like a bird with wind, you can just glide and hover and do work. But as for industrial power generation, wind is also hot garbage. I'm not a respecter of it in the form that we're seeing it proliferate. And I think that's where we're going to be having some disagreements. My goal is to, entertain you, but also get you on my side that hydrocarbons are the most sustainable form of Bitcoin mining into the future. And sort of the way I want to try to, this topic, and me and Jesse, we talked about it so much, we'd agree it's so nuanced. But what I'm hoping to do is sort of distill it down to just sort of a couple definitions of sustainability, and just we'll focus on that, because you can go off so many different tangents. But the two ways I want to talk about the sustainability aspect of Bitcoin and hydrocarbons as the main source of energy into the future. One is economic sustainability, and that economic, and I want you to think of economic and environmental as one and the same, mainly because you cannot spend capital, you cannot operate things without consuming the environment. There's an economic and environmental side to that. So I'm only talking about in the economic sense, but I also mean the environmental sense. And the other one I want to focus on is social sustainability. Excuse me. Not like today's woke culture, but in what it does for mankind, what it does for the individual freedom and that kind of thing. So I'm going to talk about economic sustainability, social sustainability, and why hydrocarbons are best for Bitcoin mining. And I'm going to keep reiterating that. So they told me to keep reiterating the thesis here. First thing I want to point out, in terms of the economic sustainability of this, when you compare coal-fired power generation, natural gas, or even crude oil, which I won't talk about that much because it's not so relevant anymore, but natural gas and coal being the generation capacity for Bitcoin mining, you got to remember that unlike wind, solar, nuclear, or any other hydro, any other form of power generation, the hydrocarbon base, the energy generation side of it, the electricity, is a byproduct. It's one byproduct. It's one product of what that does for the world. So I'm not going to obviously shill hydrocarbons in a general sense, like the fact that every single item in this building is brought to you by hydrocarbons, either in its form, even combusted coal is in gypsum in walls and all that kind of thing. But just bear in mind that when you have a coal-fired power plant, a lot of the infrastructure required, like the mines to get that coal to the power plant, it's not just for generating power, it's also to get the raw materials of that resource into things you use every day. Like your children's Tylenol is made from coal tar. There's a million, I could just list off a million items in which coal is needed and used by everyone every day. But just bear in mind that it is a byproduct stream. So if you just say, let's censor coal-fired power plants or natural gas-fired power plants, well, natural gas, largely, especially in Texas, where you have an immense amount of natural gas waste and flaring, especially in West Texas, it's a byproduct of oil production. It's coming up anyway. So you're either gonna burn it in a flare stack, vent it, and not even burn it, that's even worse from an environmental standpoint, or you're gonna invest in the infrastructure just to get it to the market. And that's what oil companies try to do, that's what we all try to do. But just bear in mind that when you compare hydrocarbons as a source of Bitcoin mining generation, one reason why they're so cheap is it's only one part of the stack. But if you're investing in a solar panels only do one thing. They generate power. That's it. There's no other reason to build up that infrastructure, whereas there's already a supporting infrastructure behind hydrocarbon products. So to censor hydrocarbon products, which we see today, and to say that like it doesn't have a future, it's one of many byproducts that we cannot get rid of. And Jesse, I know, agrees with me on that. We can't get rid of hydrocarbon use. So what we see in politics, like censoring and taxing and all this thing on say natural gas power plants, which are going to get burned anyway, is just sort of irrational. And that's the difference, because when you look at nuclear largely, aside from weapons, there's no other use for it. Like, it's for power generation, whereas hydrocarbons, it's more of a broader thing. So that was one main point I want you guys to think about. It's not so simple. Just say, yeah, no more natural gas power, no more coal, it's bad, shut it down. It just doesn't work that way. Moving into more economic, sustainability aspects, when you compare, say, you generally cannot have, and I'll sort of just target a few of the alternatives like wind and solar. You cannot have that kind of generation without hydrocarbons in general, in two ways. One, you need them to build it. You can't even build a solar panel without coal. Besides the fact that the resource goes into it, unless you have battery and robust energy storage for unreliable generation, which is mainly wind and solar, which you cannot tell it when to wind blow and when the clouds to go away. They're often and largely dependent on legacy grid infrastructure, which is hydrocarbon based. So in that sense, sorry? Oh, wow, 1 minute? I'm like, okay. Oh, well, so I better rush through this. So there's a dependency there from these unreliable generation, which is the renewable side. I'll just skip over into social. I just want to get the two main points. Social sustainability aspect of this. This one is it's a tougher topic, but I think it's relevant. Think like when I talked about technology stacks, if you think of like solar panels, photovoltaic panels, and nuclear, for example, because everyone likes nuclear, but nuclear is not perfect. These things are high up the tech stack. Coal, oil, and gas is the lowest rung on the tech stack. You can do a lot with this without needing anything higher up. You can have a coal-fired power plant. You don't need nuclear. You don't need solar panels. Vice versa is not so true. You need hydrocarbons as you get up the stack. The point I want to make on the stack is that because it's high tech, nuclear is not accessible to individuals. It's not accessible to most countries, in fact, because of unfortunately, it's highly regulated. Whereas coal, oil, especially coal, but like oil and gas, it's more abundantly distributed, it's easier to access, but it also has more robust industries around it. And then on that point, when it comes to like sustaining the individuals like that depend on it, there's more of a robust infrastructure around this, like service companies, empowering people, the wealth distribution of like actually say like oil field service companies. You don't see that in wind and solar in particular, or nuclear. You don't see these peripheral markets develop and empower and generate wealth to the people. So it's more of like a wealth, there's more wealth distribution aspect with, you get better wealth accessibility with hydrocarbons.
I'll stop you there. You can, of course, elaborate more during the debate.
Sure.
Thank you so much, Steve. We'll switch over. Switching over to Jesse.
So to start, I'd like to open that I agree with Steve on a lot of aspects of this. Hydrocarbons are essential to modern life. We build a lot of things out of hydrocarbons. They're an incredibly important chemical input. But the place where I'm specifically going to disagree is that hydrocarbons are the most sustainable form of energy production. Human energy use has been increasing since the dawn of time, and there are fundamental limitations on hydrocarbons. So I want to just look through the history of human energy use. Back in prehistory, before agriculture, before the invention of fire, humans had access to about 100 watts per person. That's just the human metabolism. So eating food, we had about 100 watts of energy. The invention of fire and the invention of animal agriculture increased the amount of energy availability from humans to a few hundred watts. And it dramatically transformed society. So we were able to do metalworking, we were able to build complex societies and structures, made large-scale agriculture support much larger populations, and eventually make steam engines. And steam engines are an incredible thing. They not only powered the Industrial Revolution, but also were the fundamental, like the optimization of steam engines was the fundamental reason that we developed thermodynamics and quantum theories, and they've progressed society in ways that are, like, if you went back and asked a person 1,000 years ago, they couldn't possibly imagine the way that society has transformed. But there are fundamental limits to oil and gas. So as humans increased our amount of energy use from biofuels, originally we were cutting down forests, then eventually harvesting whales, and in a very short amount of time, we started doing a lot of ecological damage. The British Isles were deforested back in the Bronze Age with low energy civilization. And oil and gas and coal were actually a large step forward from that biofuel. Coal meant that we didn't have to keep chopping down forests and causing deforestation. Oil meant that we didn't have to keep killing whales for whale oil. And oil and gas has gotten significantly more environmentally friendly over its development. Initially, when we were making just kerosene out of oil, we were throwing gasoline into rivers. And we eventually found uses for gasoline as that waste product, and now we power cars off of gasoline. So my problem is not fundamentally with the production of hydrocarbons. Hydrocarbons can be produced in a very sustainable way. They can be produced in a way that's not environmentally harmful, and in the first world, they typically are. The problem, though, is that hydrocarbons place a significant limit on the total amount of energy available to humans. And it's not because there's not enough hydrocarbons in the ground. In fact, there's more hydrocarbons in the ground than there is oxygen in the atmosphere. But there's just still a fundamental limitation that is stored energy. And if you look on an energy basis, the amount of energy that is stored between all of the hydrocarbons in the ground and all the oxygen in the atmosphere is about 3 years worth of sunlight. So the sunlight that is constantly hitting the Earth provides about 6,000 times as much energy as our total primary energy consumption. So as we move up the Kardashev scale towards type 1 civilization, fossil fuels will eventually just become irrelevant.
Could you just briefly explain Kardashev scale?
So the Kardashev scale is a theoretical scale to measure types of alien civilizations. Now, the relevance to type 1 is basically a type 1 civilization controls all of the energy flows on its planet. And if you look at a fundamental basis on the planet, there's only a few sources of energy. So there's the continuous energy input that we have from the sun, and then there's stored energy that's in chemical energy, like in the atmosphere and in hydrocarbons, and there's stored energy in nuclear. So there's a lot of uranium and thorium on the planet. And there's some stored energy and some continual production of geothermal energy from the decay of radioactive compounds in the Earth's crust, or in the Earth. And if you look at if you believe that humans will continue to grow in terms of our energy, there are really only two options for that growth. There's nuclear and there's solar. So nuclear has, in terms of sunlight, right? All of the chemical energy that's stored in the atmosphere is about 3 years worth of sunlight. Nuclear is millions of years worth of sunlight. Now that still pales in comparison to the billions of years of sunlight that the Earth will receive in the future before it's absorbed by the. So I fundamentally believe that humans are going to continue to increase the amount of energy that we use. So humans are going to continue to increase the amount of energy that's available to us, and it's going to do amazing things for human society. The increase in energy usage from prehistoric humans burning wood and using animals to do labor to today is about 1 order of magnitude. But the amount of energy that is available from the sun that we can capture is about 3 orders of magnitude larger than the amount of energy that we use today. It is impossible to imagine what we can do with that amount of energy, but I'm confident that it will promote human prosperity and that we will invent entirely new ways to use that energy. I guess with that, I'll cede my time.
Thank you, Jesse. Steve, do you have immediate response?
Well, of course. I mean, you know, like we have some commonality. I mean, there's no doubt that I think hopefully most people in this room want to see humanity continue to grow, proliferate. We have big families, have more efficient usage of our resources, maybe get off the planet one day, you know, get into the Star Wars universe, like wherever we go. Nuclear is going to be a huge part of that. Also, hydrocarbons are going to be a huge part of that as well. So I guess I think we should dig into what you think, because one statement you made was that, I'll paraphrasing, that hydrocarbons, we have to get off them or it's more on its way out. Can you elaborate on that? Because I would disagree fundamentally in the sense that, yes, we'll keep using nuclear to advance ourselves. Hopefully the leash gets taken off one of these days when the powers that be allows nuclear to proliferate as it should. But yeah, do you want to elaborate on that so I can?
Yeah. So my position is not that we should stop using all hydrocarbons tomorrow. I don't think that's smart. I think that hydrocarbons do amazing things. They've lifted the world out of poverty. They've made us far safer from weather and climate and drought and impacts. And I think we should absolutely use hydrocarbons. I just think that we should use those hydrocarbons to build the systems that will allow us to access 1,000 times as much energy as we currently have access to. And I think that we will continue to use hydrocarbons for other things, like making plastics and making petrochemicals. And they're just not a long-term source of energy because they're fundamentally constrained by the amount of oxygen that's in the atmosphere. And the long-term sustainable rate that you can burn hydrocarbons is the rate that the biosphere replaces that oxygen. And that rate is a lot lower than even what we're using today. So today, about 1/4 of the carbon dioxide that is emitted into the atmosphere is being taken up by the biosphere. In order for the entire world to have just an American standard of living, we're talking about quadrupling the amount of energy use on the planet. And that's assuming that we don't want America to have an even higher standard of living than it has right now. So the rate of use of this very limited resource of the atmosphere is actually quite high. Depending on how bullish you are on human energy, we're going to hit those limits in decades or hundreds of years. It's not tens of thousands of years, millions of years, billions of years of energy that's available from this chemical store.
I think one thing that's important is, we're talking about the energy. It's important to address the energy base for Bitcoin mining, which is the most sustainable for Bitcoin mining. But I would say that one reason why I don't see nuclear as the basis, the most sustainable basis for Bitcoin mining in the future is because nuclear power, it's controllable, it's reliable, it can be generated, it can be turned up, turned down based on the demand needs. Because it has that aspect, it doesn't have a huge waste stream. It does have some. It still makes a lot of sense. There's companies right now, friends with some of the, I don't know if any of them here, like Talent Energy and others that are behind the meter mining Bitcoin at nuclear power plants. It makes a lot of sense for base load, load modulation to do this, to mine on nuclear, strictly on nuclear, not taking other sources from the grid like we see most miners on the grid do. But you just got to remember nuclear power and a lot of these other non-fossil fuel base loads, they do one thing. And so because they do one thing, the market they best serve is the market that has most demand of their energy, which is you guys. At your house, you critically need your power. Bitcoin miners don't need the power. We can turn off, we can modulate ourselves. We only go after what's cheap. Inherently nuclear, now if we take the leash off nuclear, we might see it get super cheap where we are baseload mining the most in the future on Bitcoin mining, but I don't see it because hydrocarbons, like I was trying to say, I might have got cut off at the end when I was trying to get there, was that the being like a plethora of products in human society, like your clothing, all this stuff, and the energy side, like the electricity generation side is one skew. It's a waste skew. A lot of it's a waste skew. The natural gas especially is a major waste skew. And even the coal, a lot of it is it's a partial skew. So it's cheap for that reason because there's other demand on that coal. So the point is that one problem I see with your argument with nuclear in particular, or solar, wind, or any other alternative to hydrocarbons, they're a dedicated generator. Like all they do is electricity. Their best market is you guys and non-Bitcoin miners like us at home. We need it to feed our children and all this stuff. And that's one of the main criticisms I've always had about renewable. This whole meme about Bitcoin mining and renewables pair well together. Well, they do it right now because renewables are sort of massively being subsidized and artificially put on the market where they shouldn't really fit, which creates this waste stream, this curtailment. But if it was actually a natural market, my argument has always been, you wouldn't see it so much. You would still see it on, and I do think we are seeing the most proliferation of Bitcoin mining, at least in my world, on natural gas because you have so much waste gas. So the point I'm just trying to make is there's a primary source of power. Hydrocarbons, it's just like a byproduct, large in part. So,
Jesse, could you address stranded sources of energy in the non-hydrocarbon energy sector?
Yeah, so I think there's actually a really interesting discussion to be had here, which is that if you look fundamentally on grids, right, like renewables have variability in power, and that's obvious, but grids have variability in load. So for example, in ERCOT, the peak load last year was July 20th, 5 p.m., it was 80 gigawatts. The average load throughout the year is only 49 gigawatts. So we have to support not only that 80 gigawatts of generation, but also the buffer capacity for that, so over 90 gigawatts, but we're only paying for that with 49 gigawatts of demand of customers. And the value of Bitcoin mining is that it's an elastic load. So it's a load that is only going to buy energy when it's below the price that's worthwhile to produce Bitcoin, and then it turns off at prices where it's not worthwhile. So Bitcoin, the value is that it fills out that curve on the load side. And that is extremely important the more renewables and the more nuclear you have on your grid. Because nuclear and wind and solar are actually quite similar in this aspect, that they're high capex, low opex sources of electricity. So natural gas, on the other hand, is very low capex, so it's very cheap to make peaking capacity from, but it's high opex. The fuel costs are high, and that makes the price of electricity higher. So Bitcoin mining is a better fit for these inelastic, low opex sources of electricity than elastic, high opex sources, because you're able to take and use that power that otherwise would be curtailed. So for example, like a nuclear plant, right? You can ramp up and down a nuclear plant, but there's really no reason to do it. The fuel cost is incredibly low, and the real cost of a nuclear plant is the cost to set it up the first time. Anything that you can do that uses that power that it produces is helpful for the economics of that plant. Bitcoin is one of the greatest ways to do that, and that's one of the reasons why having more elastic loads on the grid, like Bitcoin, will shift the mix on the grid from natural gas towards nuclear and solar and wind.
Steve?
well, I mean, you're right in a lot of ways. Nuclear has a good future being our base load. Like nuclear has there's a lot of reasons why I'd be happy with nuclear to offset coal if it is truly a more cost efficient system. Nuclear is a little bit of a different topic. That's why I really, when I think about nuclear and why it's not all good. One, and again on topic for Bitcoin mining sustainability, is one, it's extremely valuable energy. It's because it's targeted one source reliable energy. I know Bitcoin mining can modulate its load. That doesn't really help. Nuclear is different because it's a base load. It's already reliable, but unreliable like solar and wind. Bitcoin mining helps curtail, absorb the waste that's in its capital misallocation, like too much overbuilt wind and solar, to try to actually do something decent for the grid, and then having to have backup energy supply, energy storage mechanisms, whether it's batteries or whatnot for that. All that's extremely resource intensive. And the problem, of course, is when you're using Bitcoin like behind the meter on these sites and you're sending your power to the Bitcoin mine, well, the whole point of that site presumably was to offset carbon from hydrocarbons. And if it's not doing that, it's not even serving its purpose outside of getting the people rich who got the subsidies and the cheap fiat to go build that stuff. Nuclear, I mean, it seems online at least, everyone's sort of like kumbaya about nuclear. Nuclear's not all great. It's true, I do think it is the next step in human baseload, reliable baseload, beyond coal, for example, or any hydrocarbons. It's got the potential. The problem though, too, beyond what I was already talking about, is it is highly censored. And I don't see a clear path outside of destroying fiat itself, so they don't have the power and the violence, like the war machine, to go continue to censor nuclear. But currently, nuclear is very much state controlled, and there's no clear path to get away from that. Whereas even like hydrocarbon baseload is a lot easier to proliferate. When I was talking about the tech stack, it's a lot easier for anyone here to go start up even a small power plant, natural gas peaker plant, than it is ever going to be for you to do nuclear. It's more individual empowering, at least today. That doesn't mean it won't be in the future as the tech gets better. But currently, we can only talk about what we know, and today it's highly censored by the government, U.S. government in particular, and it's very, very difficult because it's so high up the tech stack. It's not small business focused, like it's state focused. So it empowers the state. It's easily taxed by the state. We have a lot of customers, for example, again, back to Bitcoin mining, who are buying Bitcoin mining machines or building their own, like buying them from us or building their own, and doing it all on their own as small startups. It's like hydrocarbon, at least today, like natural gas, Bitcoin mining is very pro-individual, very pro-small business. And that's part of like the social sustainability. I don't see nuclear doing that for quite a while. We'll have to see, but it's gonna be quite some time until the war machine gets out of the way and stops censoring who gets to use nuclear.
Jesse, what's your take on centralization aspect of nuclear power?
So I think that it is true that nuclear, in order for nuclear to make sense, it has to be done at large scale, right? Like I'm personally not super bullish on SMR, small modular reactors, specifically because of the S. I think that we should build a lot of large nuclear reactors, and we should make them modular and replaceable. And I think that is a process that's going to take a lot of time. I don't see that happening in the next 10 years. That being said, it's something that we will do eventually. Like if you buy the thesis that humanity will grow to use all available energy sources, nuclear is a great energy source, and we will grow to use it. It's going to take time to develop. There are limitations on what you can do with nuclear, but it does. Like nuclear is a great source. It's not reliant on the distribution of wind and solar energy that you have. Like for example, like wind and solar are highly non-uniformly distributed. So, especially wind. If you look at wind, the production of wind energy, or the energy density of a wind stream, is proportional to the cube of the wind speed. So 2 times difference in wind speed is 8 times more energy. So wind within the United States has more variation in energy density than solar does in the world. And solar still has quite a bit of variation in the world. So for example, like Germany has similar solar resource to Alaska. Right? The northern United States, if you think like New York, is similar to Italy. So the US overall has great solar resource. We have great wind resource all along the wind corridor. And Texas, we have the best wind and solar resources pretty much anywhere in the world. And we have an overlap of complementary wind and solar. And that's actually really important because, as Steve mentioned earlier, renewables can produce cheap energy, but taking cheap energy and making it useful energy is a different thing, right? Like a nuclear power plant producing 24/7 energy is more valuable per unit of energy than variable production from solar or from wind. But when you have complementary production profiles, where in Texas the wind is producing more at night, solar is obviously producing during the day, the amount of storage that you need in order to make that reliable goes down dramatically. And the costs of storage have fallen dramatically. If you look 10 years ago, lithium-ion batteries were about $1,000 a kilowatt hour. Now they're under $100 a kilowatt hour, and they're still falling. And the durability of these batteries has also improved dramatically. So if you think like it used to be that they were optimizing the chemistry of these batteries basically for mobile devices. So your cell phone, your laptop, and all that mattered was energy density and charge speed. But today, the LFP batteries, lithium iron phosphate, they're designed for durability. You can have cycle lives if you're having low enough charge and discharge rate of 10,000 cycles with 20% degradation. So the cost per cycle of storage has fallen by 100 times in the last 10 years. And it went from being highly uneconomic to highly economic. And this is in large part due to investment from China. So China is not stupid. They are investing trillions of dollars in supply chains for critical materials, wind, solar, batteries.
One thing we do see in China, of course, is they're also investing heavily in coal-fired power plants. An argument, a conspiracy could go into, all this injection of this unreliable technology to the West is really starting to destabilize our economy by driving up our energy costs and our, the subsequent reliance systems that they rely on that aren't getting properly invested in. For example, there's a lot of it looks like we got a question. It's a fair comment. I mean, I've certainly tried to center my argument on the sustainability towards Bitcoin mining and why hydrocarbons are the basis for why Bitcoin is going to continue to be dominated. Bitcoin mining is going to be dominated on this industry. It currently is dominated on this industry. There is a lot of coal going on. But the reasons I was talking about with the secondary effects, the byproducts being effectively waste streams, that's going to continue into the future. As long as we're using hydrocarbons, we're always going to have these waste streams, and that's where Bitcoin miners shine. When I'm talking about the social aspect, the holy grail for, I think, individual freedom, I mean, that's part of the Bitcoin mantra is like we're empowering the individuals over the state. That's what Bitcoin's all about. One reason why hydrocarbons I see it as being more likely. Oh, I thought I lost the. It's cutting out, isn't it? Yeah. One thing that I've talked about in the past that whether in terms of empowering the individual beyond just using Bitcoin, but like for Bitcoin mining itself, I mean the holy grail of engineering is small. Like people having their own ability to generate power when they need it, like backyard power plants, very small modular power generation. We're not there with the technology, but if that, there are paths you can go there with hydrocarbons, with like gasified wood, like being off grid, your own self-sustaining energy system, and using the excess power to mine Bitcoin. It's something like I've talked about a lot online. If you could, like if you are generating power at home, you're not going to be able to use all of it and send the excess to Bitcoin mining. You could, basically enrich the individual further if you can develop that technology, which isn't that far-fetched. I mean, if there was some improvements to, say, Stirling engines, you could burn wood in your backyard, generate power for your home and family and neighborhood. And if it was more feasible to do it at that scale, and then all the excess would just go on your microgrid to your own load, your Bitcoin mining load. That kind of stuff you cannot get in any reasonable way with unreliable generation like solar and wind, and certainly not nuclear, because we're not anywhere close to backyard nuclear generation. So again, back to certainly trying to focus the broad energy debate on Bitcoin mining sustainability itself, but that's like something I have a vision for in the future, that as we continue to improve technology, that's something I could see us doing, because that is the holy grail of individual freedom, is basically individual ownership of our own energy.
I mean, I agree that ownership.
Sorry to interrupt. It's just I want to make sure we don't revisit the same topics over and over. And I kind of have the feeling, I don't know if the audience agrees, that there's a little bit of a disconnect in terms of timescales that people are talking about. And so I don't want to pigeonhole the resolution, like everybody has to kind of make up their own idea about that. But just to kind of try and help the discussion remain constructive, I was thinking maybe, could each of you comment on what are your thoughts on the mix of energy that's going to be used in, say, 50 years from now for mining Bitcoin sustainably? Maybe each of you could just comment on that, and of course, if you have more thoughts. But yeah, Jesse, maybe could you comment on something like that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that if you look at the trends on this, you're already seeing a huge uptick in the amount of wind and solar being used. And it's for exactly the reason that I outlined earlier, which is that these are these high capex, low opex sources of power. So most of the time when they're selling power, it's not when people want to buy it. And the more wind and solar that you add to the grid, the less overlap there is. And this is essentially the reason why LCOE, the levelized cost of energy, is a very poor metric for evaluating an energy source, because LCOE assumes that you are consuming 100% of the power when it is being produced. And as you add more and more renewables onto the grid, the limitation is that you have less and less that overlaps with when people want to consume power. In fact, if you look at wind, it's actually anti-correlated to load. So your wind production is the highest in the spring and the fall. It's the lowest in the summer and the winter, where you have the most demand for energy. So in order to unlock those renewable sources, you need to have demand that can soak up that energy. You need elastic demand. Bitcoin is perfect for that. Like, we are going to build out that wind and solar regardless. Like, I personally am of the opinion that wind and solar can stand on their own without subsidies. We are in an era where there are a lot of subsidies, and from a plain matter of fact over the next few decades, there's going to be a lot of solar and wind that's built. And there's going to be a lot of energy that is going to be produced that does not line up with when people want to consume it. And Bitcoin mining is a perfect tool to be able to use and monetize that energy. And it takes a significant amount of financial burden off of those projects.
And so if you had to guess percentage-wise, like what are some percentages you would estimate the mix to be for Bitcoin mining?
Today or in the future?
No, I mean in the future, let's say 50 years from now.
I think it's going to be well over 90% wind and solar. I do think that there will be cases for, like flared natural gas here and there, but it's very difficult to get economies of scale doing that.
I think that would go.
Steve, you want to address?
Well, I think it is important to talk about just general energy generation, and because Bitcoin mining is a tool to balance these generation systems. The wind and solar having 90%, I think, is crazy. I think it's already artificially high. Frankly, because it does almost wholly depend on subsidies, either direct injection or the censorship of, for example, Will Cole here was talking to me about coal plants being limited on the profit margins. They're restrained on how profitable they can become, which ends up being an indirect subsidy for investors investing in the competition, which they don't have that restraint. There's a lot of factors, and unfortunately, we're not in a free market, so it's very hard to parse where the layout would be on a mix of generation. There's clearly going to be a mix, but again, going back to Bitcoin mining, Bitcoin mining doesn't fix the problem with unreliable generation, which is you don't know when it's going to happen. Energy storage fixes that. Bitcoin is not a battery. What it does, it helps monetize that curtailed energy, but the problem is that it shouldn't have been built in the first place when you have reliable baseload that you could build, whether it's nuclear or hydrocarbons or whatever. Well, but back to what I had said, I do think it's going to continue to be hydrocarbons for the foreseeable future, because there's no way to replace the primary product that we need, which is the material. So
if you had to pick a number, like market share of hydrocarbon energized Bitcoin mining 50 years from now, what number would you pick?
I would say solar is going to go back to calculators. It's going to go back to wind is going to go back to sailboats. It's going to be used in niche applications where it just doesn't make sense to use anything else. And we're going to have mainly hydrocarbon energy base with nuclear, of course, because nuclear is an improvement in the tech.
Right.
So one interesting point here. If you look, the right mix of electricity for different parts of the world is going to be different. But there are markets in the world operating today with 90% wind and solar. There's one really close to here. It's West Texas. We are already, if you have complementary, strong renewable resources, you can already economically provide the vast majority of the power directly from renewables, even with the curtailment. That the amount of power that you're throwing away, it is an economic burden on the project, but it's not enough to hold that project back. So there's still a lot of wind and solar that will be built out. And I think also if you're looking at the fact of what is Bitcoin going to use, Bitcoin will use the cheapest sources of power possible. So what is cheaper than a zero marginal cost source of power that is dumping power onto the grid for most of the year? So
we are at 25 minutes. I think I'll leave it at this. Now it's time for the closing statement. So each of you have 2 minutes. Like, think about it as an elevator pitch to the audience, your final opportunity to convince them on how to vote. Let me just repeat the resolution one more time, and I'll give you each 2 minutes. The resolution is hydrocarbons are the most sustainable source of energy to mine Bitcoin. Take it away, Steve.
I mean, in a nutshell, I mean, we have this broad mass market media narrative that hydrocarbons bad. Hydrocarbons are overwhelmingly a net positive in every way. There are like any use of any resource, there's always some negative consequences. They're putting carbon emissions on a pedestal. Arguably, you know, I say it a lot online, that's not even a pollutant, it's sort of a nonsensical, it's a great way to do an accounting scam is what carbon accounting does. But I mean, in the end, as Bitcoin interested people, we're interested in individual empowerment, individual freedom. I don't see the renewable sector, the hydro, nuclear, doing anything for us anytime soon. Hydrocarbons, I see it every day in my business. Individuals investing either in our product or building their own, empowering themselves, getting wealthier, feeding their families. And I mean, what are they doing bad? They're creating some carbon dioxide, which is the basis of photosynthesis. There's not a whole lot of negative about what's going on in the Bitcoin side of pairing Bitcoin mining with the energy system that is generated through hydrocarbons. So, I mean, really, I think the individual empowerment is the most important thing in today's society right now. I mean, yes, the economic allocation of capital is always important. We should keep investing in what is best. But this is a big deal. Bitcoin is a big deal. And empowering individuals with Bitcoin mining, hydrocarbons is where that's going to be now and into the foreseeable future.
Thank you, Steve.
So vote for me, please.
Over to Jesse.
Humans are going to expand to use every source of energy that is economically viable and available to us. The biggest sources of energy on the planet are solar and nuclear, and that is what the future energy system is going to be built out of. And it's not that far away. Like, the investment is happening now. You're already seeing many states that have over 50% of their electricity coming from wind and solar. The world will continue to build more and more wind and solar every year. And I know that there's this perception that wind and solar is only driven by subsidies, but just from a pure factual basis, right, like, yeah, there was a lot that was driven by subsidies early on. But, you know, for example, our solar subsidies is about a 30% tax credit, right? The cost of solar has fallen more in the last 5 years than the subsidy there is for solar. If you look, for example, at the cost of installing solar on a rooftop here in the US is about $3 a watt. In Australia, it's 70 cents a watt. In China, it's 50 cents a watt. So even after the 30% subsidy, solar is still more expensive here than in places in other parts of the world. And it's because of the red tape that we have. It's the same regulations that are holding back other energy sources are holding back wind and solar. And we will use more wind and solar as those regulations are appealed, as more investment goes into it. It's one of the biggest things that China is investing in. You know, China is investing 50% of the renewables in the world are being installed in China. So it's not that, like, they're not building them in order to subsidize us or in order to capture subsidies from us. In fact, I would say that, like, we're missing the forest for the trees. It's not the solar panels and the wind turbines that are important. It's the manufacturing facilities that can build the solar modules and can build the wind turbines. That is the productive capability that is allowing China to access the most abundant energy sources on the planet. And I think we would be stupid not to harvest those same sources. China is building type 1 civilization. If you look at every sort of source of viable energy, coal, solar, wind, nuclear, it's all a straight line up. And we should also be building type 1 civilization.
Thank you. Thank you, Jesse. It is time for our Q&A. So Q&A is going to be, we're going to be around 3 to 5 questions, maybe a little bit more. I just want to say that we highly encourage community debate, but this is not the platform for that. So please formulate your question as a question and direct it at one of our speakers, please. Yes, in the back? In the lady in white? Yes. Could you briefly repeat the question just to make sure everybody hears it?
Yeah, so my interpretation is you're saying there are some significant problems with the supply chains in wind and solar. So, for example, conflict materials like cobalt, you mentioned silver in solar panels, and look, there are absolutely material constraints. A lot of these are caused by regulations that make it very difficult to mine these things in the US. But the situation is not nearly as bleak as it might seem. So for example, the world's largest producer of lithium is Australia. You can use substitutes for silver in solar panels. So for example, you can use copper. There are methods that you can use copper to replace silver. There are certain chemistries of solar panels that I am very concerned with. So for example, cadmium telluride panels, very toxic, right? Those are things that are very destructive to aquatic ecosystems. I don't think that that is a good thing that we want to install massive amounts of those. Crystalline silicon panels, on the other hand, completely different. Crystalline silicon panels are built out of the 3 most abundant elements in the Earth's crust. So the Earth's crust is about 40% oxygen, about 25% silicon, about 10% aluminum. Those are the 3 primary materials to make silicon solar panels. You use a little bit of phosphorus for doping. You have to use a little bit of copper for wiring. You have to use a little bit of hydrocarbons to put insulators on the cables. But that's an incredibly scalable energy source. And even for things like copper, right, you may have heard, we need more copper than has been produced in the world to build out all the wind and solar. And that's true. But the thing is, if we double the amount of copper production, the rate of copper production every 20 years. We've been doing this since at least the mid-1800s, and it's not slowing down. There was a famous bet between Paul Ehrlich and Julian Simon on this specific thing about resource constraints and critical minerals. And Paul Ehrlich was the Malthusian saying, look, we're gonna run out of all of these materials. There's just not enough in the earth. We're gonna run out of everything. Everybody's gonna die. And Julian Simon said, look, human innovation we've been finding new ways to extract, refine, and use these materials for thousands of years. And we're going to continue to do that. And he was proven to be right. And I don't think that trend is gonna change anytime soon.
Thank you, Jesse. Another question? Yes, I think you were there as well last time, yeah.
I think y'all both did a great job of outlining the benefits of hydrocarbons and renewables, but I'd like to hear specifically about Bitcoin mining. And this might be trite, but when I think about the sustainability of Bitcoin mining, I think of the economics, I think of the energy costs, your input costs, and I think of maximizing uptime, which I would think are probably the most important aspects of Bitcoin mining. Can we talk about those economics and how they differ from baseload energy and hydrocarbons versus renewable energy? I feel like we did address that at least loosely, like or at least I tried to. There certainly are major differences. The thing right now, if you're mining on the grid, you're getting a plethora of, if you're in West Texas, yes, you're getting West Texas wind, unless you're behind the meter, but you're also going to get other sources as backup. No matter where you are, you're going to get a mix. If you're talking exclusive behind the meter, you don't see exclusive behind the meter at wind plants on free market conditions, like unless there's subsidies going into basically a big narrative around the project to go build it out, but you don't see it repeat. No one scales it because it doesn't make money. Again, why I was focusing on the waste streams of hydrocarbons is because they're effectively they're almost no cost. The only cost is the incremental cost to get the pipelines to the power plants. Because when you have an oil field and you have associated gas, the gas is already there, it's already being wasted. There is no fuel cost. The cost is the capital, the amortized capital cost to actually get it to the market, which isn't very high. And my company obviously specializes in doing it at the site, where you have plenty of reliable gas to keep your base load, and you can modulate it, and we do modulate the load based on the availability. But I mean, the economics is pretty straightforward. There's no cost of fuel. Even behind the meters, solar or wind, you could also say there's no cost of fuel if you ignore all the peripheral factors. It's just uptime. And there is an uptime difference, but as the market is maturing, the market will be able to bear more and more downtime as these computers commoditize and get cheaper and more, because we're already seeing more and more computers sit on racks doing nothing when the bear market comes all of a sudden, right? And then when the bull market comes, those S9s come out of the grave like they did the last time, and they're back on the shelf like we've seen that last cycle. And that's why all the broken S9 parts I have, we have thousands of hash boards broken in my shop. They're not worth repairing right now, but we're not going to sell them because if the bull market comes roaring back, they're going to have value again, right? So, I mean, yeah, I won't get into obviously the bare economics of it, but the ability for Bitcoin to be located anywhere, that's why I've always said like it should be upstream at the plant and as a base load at whatever generation source is the best place for it to be.
Thank you.
I don't know if I answered your question.
Sorry, it's just one-on-one questions for now. Next question.
Yes, I want to thank our distinguished moderator and orators. But one thing I think is interesting as two sides of the energy debate is that you both brought up the strategic advantages of your position against China. And I find that to be...
Could you please just focus on the question? Thank you.
Yes, yes. I think that that is very interesting to the use case that we're talking about now, which is Bitcoin mining. The number one manufacturer of mining hardware is Chinese, Bitmain, we all know. And essentially this industry came up in China. So how do we reconcile this geopolitical hostility with the strategic importance of our industry and also just the humanity of the Chinese people and what they have brought to all of the people in our room if we think that Bitcoin is important to us as individuals?
Thank you. Jesse?
Yeah, I mean, I would say like the reason that I brought up China as an example is that I think what China is doing in terms of energy is smart, right? Like they're not investing in wind and solar in order to scam a few Americans and Europeans out of tax dollars. They're doing it in order to access thousands of times more energy than humanity has access to today. This has been a strategic plan for decades. They're executing very well on it. You know, initially, China copied a lot of solar technology from Germany. They've actually made significant innovations within their country, and they have strict controls on export of that technology, and similar in batteries. So this is a wave, it's a revolution that is coming. The world is going to produce vastly more energy from wind and solar than is consumed in the entire world today. And I think that like we get caught up in looking at the specifics of like, you know, there are subsidies in the US that did drive a lot of solar. There, if, for example, in Germany, a lot of early subsidies drove solar, but that's not what's driving it today. It's fundamentally cost. Like the cost of solar has fallen.
I'd like to just, I don't think either of us sort of played a geopolitical game that put China down. I don't know exactly where you're coming from with that. I'll give you a different example. So allegedly, the US blew up Nord Stream pipeline, allegedly. That put Russia in a very bad spot for selling their energy. When that happened, the first thing I said on Twitter is Russia's gonna start mining a lot of Bitcoin with economic sanctions, okay, restricting their access to SWIFT and other, you know, fiat rails, and something happened to one of their big pipelines. And sure enough, we are seeing verified rumors. My own suppliers I've asked them directly, they are selling more and more Bitcoin machines to Russia. Now, is the American political scheme gonna like to hear that? No, but that's what's happening. I know that, you know, we might say something, you know, I know it was said, it was brought up like the ethical aspect of some of Chinese manufacturing. One reason I didn't bring that up in my counterpoints against solar and batteries and the conflict side of that stuff is because it's not just isolated to renewables, like oil and gas supply chains also come from the same regions and the same areas that have conflicts. So it's not a great argument, that's why I didn't touch it. But that is a fact. That is happening in the Congo, that is happening. But I mean, I know that me as a Bitcoiner, I don't really care about the politics side. I'm here to defund the state is my interest, as on a personal level, maybe not on a business level. And so like, I know that's I'm actually getting audited by the CRA right now. You know, they have a target on us, on Bitcoiners. But I mean, I'm personally not at all interested whatsoever in the US government or the Canadian government. I could care less. I hope they all go bankrupt. And I mean, we want to build tools to empower individuals, including, and I do, hopefully no one here disrespected the Chinese population. fuck the Chinese government, but I like the population and a lot of wonderful things for Bitcoin.
Thank you. There'll be the last question.
Yeah, there was no mention of hydropower, like with wave energy and stuff like that.
Yeah. So I didn't talk about hydropower or really geothermal. Wave energy or really geothermal because they're just very limited in scale in comparison to the amount of energy from solar or from nuclear. It's if you look at the amount, you have 1 million times as much energy from nuclear as you do from chemical fuels. You've got on the order of 1,000 times as much energy from solar as you do from nuclear. And geothermal, I think, will be a portion of our energy. There's about 50 terawatts of geothermal energy that's being generated and is flowing up through the earth. That's about 2.5 times current global human civilizational energy use. So it will be part of the mix, but that is not the same sort of transformative change that you get from nuclear or solar.
Thank you. So with that, we conclude our debate, and it is time to go back to the vote. I see some results. Is this before?
This is pre.
Okay, so pre, that was interesting, because 32% was undecided, 35% was against the motion, so basically agreeing with Jesse, and then 33% was for the motion, basically agreeing with Steve. So how did that change?
So we got 33, 35, 32.
Yeah.
How many total votes? 81.
Aha, so the 35 jumped up to 43% against the motion. So hereby we declare Jesse Peltan to be the winner of our debate tonight. Congratulations, Jesse.